What if I told you that a direct ancestor of Jesus Christ once betrayed his own brother, selling him into the shackles of slavery for a mere 20 pieces of silver? Imagine the weight of that decision, the sheer callousness of the act. But the story doesn't end there. This same man's life descended into a spiral of moral decay, a chaotic freefall so intense that he unknowingly slept with his own daughter-in-law, blurring the lines of family and morality in a way that would send shivers down your spine. And yet, from this broken, deeply flawed human being, a man riddled with imperfections, would spring forth the royal lineage of King David, the shepherd king, the warrior poet. And ultimately, from that line, the Messiah himself, the savior of mankind, would emerge. This is the shocking, unvarnished truth of Judah, the fourth son of Jacob, a man who, by all accounts, should have faded into the dusty pages of history, a footnote at best. Instead, he became one of the most pivotal figures in biblical narrative, his life a testament to the unpredictable nature of grace. Music. His journey is a harrowing one, taking us from the blood-stained coat of his betrayed brother, Joseph, a garment that served as a chilling symbol of envy and deceit, to a roadside encounter that would peel back the layers of his carefully constructed facade, exposing his deepest hypocrisy to the harsh light of day. We will witness a transformation so profound, so utterly unexpected, that this man, who once so callously profited from his own brother's suffering, would later offer to become a slave himself, willingly trading his freedom to protect another, a sacrifice that speaks volumes about the power of redemption. Judah's story is not sanitized. It's not sugar-coated. It's not designed to make you comfortable. It's raw, it's gritty, it's unsettling, and it's brutally honest in its depiction of human fallibility. It reveals the profound and often mysterious ways in which God weaves threads of redemption through the tapestry of our worst failures, our darkest moments, the times when we believe ourselves to be beyond saving. The Lion of Judah, a symbol of strength, courage, and kingship, didn't spring forth fully formed. He didn't start as a lion. He started as a coward, a deceiver, a man wrestling with his own demons, a broken individual who had to confront the ugliest, most unpalatable parts of himself before he could rise to become the Father of Kings. This is his story, a story of descent, of repentance, and ultimately of unexpected grace. Judah's story begins not in triumph, but in a household simmering with tension, a pressure cooker of heartbreak and unrequited love. His mother, Leah, was trapped in a marriage where she desperately craved her husband's affection, yearning for a connection that remained perpetually out of reach. Jacob's heart belonged to Rachel, Leah's younger, more beautiful sister, and this painful truth was a constant, unspoken presence in their lives, a shadow that stretched across every family interaction. Leah had already borne Jacob 3 sons before Judah came along, each birth a desperate attempt to finally capture her husband's attention, to finally be seen and loved. Her first son was Reuben, a name meaning "see a son," because she believed the Lord had seen her misery, acknowledging her pain in the birth of her child. Her second was Simeon, meaning "one who hears," because the Lord had heard that she was unloved, responding to her silent cries for affection. Her third was Levi, meaning attached, a name chosen with the fervent hope that her husband would finally become attached to her, binding their hearts together. But when Leah became pregnant for the 4th time, something profound shifted within her heart. A quiet revolution began to take root. She stopped looking to Jacob for validation, for the love and acceptance he seemed incapable of providing. She turned her gaze upward. The book of Genesis 29 verse 35 tells us exactly what happened, a pivotal moment in Leah's journey. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "This time I will praise the Lord." So she named him Judah. That name, Judah, meant praise. After 3 sons, each named with a longing for Jacob's love, she decided to break free from that cycle of disappointment. She chose to stop looking to her husband for what only God could give, the unconditional love and acceptance her soul craved. She chose to praise God, regardless of her circumstances, regardless of the emptiness she felt in her marriage. And from that moment of worship, a child was born who would carry a legacy far beyond anything Leah could have imagined, a legacy that would shape the destiny of a nation and ultimately, the course of human history. Judah entered the world as the fourth son, not the firstborn who would normally receive the greatest inheritance, the blessings and privileges associated with primogeniture. He wasn't particularly special in terms of birth order. He was just another son in a growing, complicated family, born to a woman who had finally found peace and purpose in praising her God. Judah grew up in a household where his father's heart belonged to someone else, a reality that shaped his understanding of love, family, and belonging. Jacob made no secret of his favoritism, and it permeated every aspect of their lives. The family structure was complicated and often painful, a tangled web of relationships and rivalries. Jacob had two wives who were sisters, Leah and Rachel, plus two concubines, Bilhah and Zilpah. All four women bore him children, creating a sprawling family of 12 sons and at least one daughter. As a young boy, Judah witnessed the constant tension, the subtle digs, and the not-so-subtle power struggles between his mother and Rachel. He felt the weight of being born to the wrong woman, the woman who was loved less. In their culture, being the son of the favored wife mattered enormously. It affected your status within the family, your inheritance, your future prospects, the opportunities that would be afforded to you. And Judah knew from a young age that he was on the wrong side of that equation, that he was starting life at a disadvantage. The tension escalated when Rachel finally conceived and gave birth to a son after years of barrenness, a miracle that only served to deepen the divide within the family. Genesis 30 verse 24 records. She named him Joseph and said, "May the Lord add to me another son." Joseph became Jacob's favorite from the moment he was born. Being the firstborn son of the wife Jacob actually loved, Joseph received treatment and privileges that none of the other brothers ever experienced, further fueling the flames of jealousy and resentment. As Judah and his brothers grew older, they toiled in the fields, tending their father's flocks, enduring the hard physical labor that sustained their family. Meanwhile, Joseph seemed to be exempt from such hardships, enjoying special privileges and receiving preferential treatment. The brothers noticed everything, every subtle nuance of their father's affection. They saw how their father's eyes lit up when he looked at Joseph. They heard the warmth in Jacob's voice when he spoke to Rachel's son. They felt the sting of being overlooked, of being considered less worthy, day after day, year after year. When Jacob had something important to say, a task of particular significance, he often confided in Joseph, entrusting him with responsibilities that the other brothers were deemed unfit to handle. The other brothers were treated as laborers, as workers whose primary purpose was to serve the family's needs. But Joseph was treated as precious, as beloved, as the son who truly mattered. This wasn't just minor sibling rivalry, the kind of squabble that's easily dismissed. This was a deep, festering wound that poisoned the hearts of 11 brothers who knew, in their innermost beings, that they would never be enough in their father's eyes, that they would always be second best. Judah lived with this painful reality every day of his childhood. He watched his father's face light up with joy whenever Joseph entered the room. He saw the gifts, the attention, the unwavering love that flowed freely to Joseph, a constant reminder of their own perceived inadequacy. The favoritism created a toxic environment, breeding jealousy and resentment that grew like a poisonous vine, choking the life out of their familial bonds. The brothers couldn't help but compare themselves to Joseph, constantly measuring their worth against his perceived perfection, and invariably finding themselves lacking in their father's eyes. And that relentless comparison poisoned their hearts, turning them against their younger brother, fostering a hatred that would ultimately lead to unthinkable acts. Everything reached a breaking point when Joseph was 17 years old, a pivotal moment that would forever alter the course of their lives. Jacob, in his blindness, did something that pushed his sons beyond their breaking point, igniting a chain of events that would have devastating consequences. Genesis 37 verse 3 explains, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him." This wasn't just any piece of clothing, a simple garment to keep him warm. It was a richly decorated coat, music, a vibrant tapestry of colors and intricate designs that screamed favoritism, a visible symbol that Joseph was set apart from his brothers, that he was elevated above them in his father's eyes. Every time Joseph wore that coat, it announced to everyone within sight that he was special, that he was favored, that he was more important than his siblings. The coat screamed inequality with every thread, a constant, painful reminder of the chasm that divided them. But the coat was just the beginning, a mere prelude to the even greater offense that Joseph would commit. He started having dreams, vivid and symbolic visions that seemed to portend his future dominance, and he made the terrible mistake of sharing them with his already resentful brothers. In Genesis 37 verses 5-7 we read, "Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, 'Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it.'" Music. Think about how that sounded to Judah and his brothers. They were already struggling with the feeling of being second-class sons, constantly overshadowed by Joseph's favored status. They were already watching Joseph receive special treatment, a constant reminder of their own perceived lack of worth. And now Joseph was telling them about dreams where they would bow down to him, acknowledging his superiority in the most humiliating way possible. The brothers' response was immediate and visceral. Verse 8 tells us, "His brothers said to him, 'Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?' And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said." The word hated appears multiple times in this passage. This wasn't mild dislike or simple sibling rivalry. This was deep, bitter hatred that had been building for years, a potent cocktail of jealousy, resentment, and wounded pride. Joseph, oblivious to the depth of their animosity, had another dream, even more audacious than the first, further inflaming their already volatile emotions. In verses 9 and 10 we read, "Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. 'Listen,' he said, 'I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me.' When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, 'What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?' Genesis 37 verse 4 states plainly, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. They couldn't even engage in a normal, civil conversation with Joseph. The animosity was so thick, so pervasive, that it poisoned every interaction. The family was completely fractured, teetering on the brink of disaster. That break finally came when Jacob, in his oblivious favoritism, sent Joseph to check on his brothers, unaware of the simmering rage that threatened to erupt. Verses 13 and 14 record, Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Joseph, ever obedient to his father's wishes, traveled to find them, eventually tracking them to Dothan. He had no idea he was walking into a trap, that his own brothers were plotting his demise. Genesis 37 verse 18 captures the chilling reality of the situation. "But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him." The brothers spotted Joseph coming from afar, likely recognizing that ornate coat, a symbol of everything they resented, and instead of feeling any brotherly affection, any sense of familial loyalty, their first impulse was murder. They had time to see him approaching, time to talk, time to plan. And what they planned was to end his life, to silence the dreamer once and for all. The brothers' plan was brutal, a chilling testament to the depth of their hatred. Genesis 37 verse 19 and 20 record their words. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." There was mockery in their tone, a cruel sarcasm when they called him that dreamer, dismissing his visions as mere fantasies. But Reuben, the eldest brother, attempted to save Joseph, albeit with a hidden agenda, trying to find a way to rescue him without directly defying his brothers. Verses 21 and 22. When Reuben heard this, He tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. The brothers' music agreed to Reuben's plan, seemingly appeased by the promise of a less violent solution. When Joseph arrived, unsuspecting and trusting, they seized him. Verse 23. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing. Music, they tore that hated coat off his body, a symbolic act of stripping him of his identity, his privilege, and his perceived superiority. Then, verse 24. And they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. Joseph was plunged into darkness, into the cold, damp depths of the pit, his fate uncertain. Then, something truly cold-hearted happened, a moment of shocking indifference that reveals the depravity to which they had sunk. Genesis 37, verse 25. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Joseph was trapped in a pit, likely crying out for help, his voice echoing in the darkness. And his brothers, unmoved by his suffering, sat down to eat, their appetites apparently unaffected by the heinous act they had just committed. That's when Judah spoke up, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Genesis 37 verse 26 and 27 record his words. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. Judah wasn't trying to save Joseph out of compassion, out of any sense of brotherly love. Read his reasoning carefully, dissect his motives. He asked, "What will we gain?" It was purely a financial calculation, a pragmatic decision devoid of any moral considerations. Why waste an opportunity to make money? Why be guilty of murder when they could profit from their brother's misery? Judah found a middle ground between Reuben's half-hearted mercy and the other's outright violence. But his solution was just as cruel, just as devoid of empathy. The transaction happened quickly, efficiently, like a business deal coldly executed. Genesis 37, verse 28. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. 20 shekels was the standard price for a young slave, a paltry sum that represented the value they placed on their own brother's life. That's what they decided Joseph was worth. 20 pieces of silver. Imagine Joseph's terror as he was pulled from the pit, his eyes adjusting to the sudden light. For a fleeting moment, he might have dared to hope that his brothers had changed their minds, that they had relented. But then he saw the money changing hands, the glint of silver in the sunlight. He felt the cold, unforgiving metal of chains on his wrists, binding him, stealing his freedom. He understood with sickening clarity that his own brothers were selling him like an animal, discarding him like unwanted property. The Bible doesn't tell us what Joseph said, what pleas he uttered, what tears he shed. But years later, his brothers would remember, the memory of his desperation haunting them. Genesis 42 verse 21 records their haunting memory. They said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us." Joseph had begged them, pleaded for mercy, appealed to their sense of family, and they ignored every word, every tear, every desperate plea for compassion. Judah watched the caravan disappear toward Egypt, the silhouette of Joseph fading into the distance, a prisoner in chains. He had his share of silver, his blood money, as his reward. It seemed like a clean solution, a problem neatly resolved. No blood on their hands, no body to hide, and Joseph gone forever, silencing his dreams and his favored status. But what Judah didn't know, what he couldn't possibly foresee, was that this moment, this act of betrayal, would haunt him for decades, shaping his character, driving his decisions, and ultimately leading him down a path of repentance and redemption. With Joseph gone, banished to a distant land, the brothers faced a new problem, a daunting task that required careful planning and a complete lack of remorse. How would they explain his disappearance to their father? They needed a believable story, a convincing narrative that would absolve them of blame and prevent Jacob from discovering the truth. And they needed physical evidence to support their lie. Genesis 37 verse 31 describes their chilling plan. Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took that beautiful coat, that symbol of favoritism and resentment, and turned it into a prop for their deception, a tool to manipulate their father's grief. They made it look convincing, as if it had been through a violent animal attack, tearing the fabric and staining it with blood, creating a gruesome tableau that would break any father's heart. Then, they brought it to their father, their faces carefully composed, their hearts filled with deceit. Verse 32. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." Notice the careful wording, the subtle manipulation inherent in their phrasing. They didn't directly lie, they didn't explicitly state that Joseph was dead. They presented evidence, a carefully constructed illusion, and let Jacob draw his own devastating conclusion. Clear's throat. They called Joseph your son, rather than our brother, distancing themselves from him even in their words, subtly attempting to absolve themselves of any responsibility. Jacob, blinded by grief and trusting in his son's honesty, recognized the robe immediately. Verse 33. He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Their plan worked perfectly, flawlessly executed. Jacob believed exactly what they wanted him to believe, falling victim to their carefully crafted deception. The brothers stood there, watching their father's world collapse, their faces betraying nothing of the guilt that gnawed at their insides. They saw his face change, the light draining from his eyes. They heard the pain in his voice, a raw, visceral expression of grief that would have melted the heart of stone. And they said nothing to correct his assumption, nothing to ease his suffering, allowing him to wallow in his despair. Judah was an active participant in this deception, complicit in the act of breaking his father's heart. He watched Jacob's world crumble before his eyes and said nothing, keeping the terrible secret locked within his own soul. Jacob's grief was overwhelming, all-consuming, threatening to drown him in its depths. Genesis chapter 37:34 and 3:5. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." So his father wept for him, the tears flowing endlessly, a testament to the depth of his love and the magnitude of his loss. Jacob's grief went beyond normal mourning, exceeding the bounds of typical bereavement. He refused all comfort, rejecting the attempts of his family to console him. He declared, with unwavering conviction, that he would never stop grieving, that he would mourn until he died, joining his beloved son in the afterlife. This wasn't temporary sadness, a fleeting moment of sorrow. This was a deep, festering wound that would never heal, a permanent scar on his heart. Think about that scene, the sheer hypocrisy of it. The guilty sons approaching their father, offering comfort, speaking soothing words about a tragedy they themselves had caused. Judah and his brothers, the architects of this elaborate deception, offering condolences to the very man they had so cruelly deceived. It was twisted, perverse, a chilling example of the depths of human duplicity. The deceiver's music, comforting the deceived. Joseph had been more than just a son to Jacob. He was Rachel's firstborn, the son of his beloved wife who had died, representing Jacob's enduring connection to the woman he had loved above all others. Losing Joseph felt like losing Rachel again, reopening old wounds and exacerbating his already profound grief. The household became divided by a lie, a dark secret that hung in the air like a shroud. Judah had to live with his father's grief every single day, a constant, painful reminder of his own culpability. He had to watch Jacob's eyes fill with tears at random moments, triggered by a memory, a familiar object, or simply the weight of his sorrow. He had to hear him speak Joseph's name with longing, his voice filled with a yearning that could never be satisfied. He had to witness how his father aged rapidly under grief's weight, his spirit crushed, his joy extinguished. Music. Years passed, and Jacob's grief never diminished. The text emphasizes that Jacob wept for him, suggesting ongoing, repeated weeping. This wasn't crying that happened once, a single outburst of emotion. This was a father who wept again and again, day after day, year after year, his sorrow a constant companion. The Bible doesn't record Judah's private thoughts during this time, but we can only imagine the burden he must have carried, the weight of guilt that pressed down on him with each passing day. He was the one who had proposed selling Joseph, the architect of that fateful decision. The idea had been his. Yes, the others had agreed, but Judah had been the one to set the plan in motion. Every morning, Judah woke up and faced his father, knowing the truth that Jacob would never know, bearing the secret of Joseph's fate. He had to look into grief-stricken eyes and keep his face neutral, his expression carefully controlled, keeping the terrible secret locked inside, lest it spill out and shatter the fragile peace of their household. He had to participate in family meals, sitting around the table, pretending to be a normal family, knowing that Jacob might suddenly start crying, overwhelmed by his memories of Joseph. Judah couldn't confess. The consequences of such an act were too terrifying to contemplate. What would confession accomplish? Joseph was gone, possibly dead, enslaved in a foreign land. Telling the truth wouldn't bring him back. It would only shatter whatever trust remained in the family, destroying the bonds that held them together, however tenuously. So Judah was trapped, caught in a web of his own making. He couldn't undo what had been done. He couldn't confess without making everything worse, inflicting further pain on his already devastated father. He could only carry the burden silently, enduring the weight of his guilt and watching his father suffer because of his choices. The weight of this secret affected everything, shaping how Judah related to his brothers, all bound together by shared guilt, united in their deception. They couldn't speak freely about that day, even among themselves, the memory too painful, the consequences too dire. When they were together, the unspoken truth hung in the air, a palpable tension that permeated every conversation. The memory of Joseph's pleading face haunted Judah, a constant reminder of his cruelty. He remembered Joseph's voice, begging them to reconsider, his desperate pleas for mercy echoing in his mind. He remembered the sound of chains, the clinking of metal against metal, the symbol of Joseph's stolen freedom. He remembered the sight of the caravan growing smaller as it disappeared over the horizon, carrying Joseph away to an uncertain future. He remembered the weight of the silver coins in his hand, blood money from his own brother's suffering. Every time Jacob mentioned Joseph's name, every time tears rolled down his father's cheeks, Judah was reminded of his role in causing that pain, a searing reminder of his moral failure. The guilt was enormous, inescapable, a constant companion that shadowed his every step. Judah had thought that selling Joseph would solve their problem, that it would remove the favored brother, end the dreams, silence the constant reminder that they weren't enough in their father's eyes. But the solution had created a far bigger problem, a deeper wound that refused to heal. Their father's heart was shattered beyond repair, his joy extinguished, his spirit crushed. This burden, this overwhelming sense of guilt and responsibility, would shape Judah's character in the years ahead, influencing his decisions and driving him down a path of unexpected transformation. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't bring Joseph back. He couldn't ease his father's pain without destroying what remained of their family. He could only move forward, carrying this knowledge into every decision and every moment of his future, hoping to somehow atone for his past sins. After everything that happened with Joseph, after the betrayal, the deception, and the unbearable weight of guilt, something fundamental changed in Judah, a shift in his perspective that would completely alter the direction of his life. He made a decision, a decisive act of separation that would have profound consequences for himself and his family. Genesis 38 verse 1 tells us what happened. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. The phrase "at that time" connects directly to the events we just witnessed, the selling of Joseph and the deception of Jacob. The weight of those actions, the moral implications of their choices, hung heavy in the air. Right after participating in those terrible acts, Judah physically separated himself from his family, severing the ties that bound him to his brothers, his father, and his past. He left his brothers and went down to Adullam, a Canaanite town located in the lands west of Hebron. This wasn't a short trip, a casual visit, or a business journey. The text says he went down to stay, indicating that he was settling there, making it his new home, establishing a life separate from his family. He was putting distance between himself and his brothers, between himself and his father's ongoing grief, between himself and the daily reminder of what they had done, seeking refuge from the pain and guilt that haunted him. We don't know exactly why Judah left. The Bible doesn't explicitly state his reasons. Maybe the music guilt was too heavy to carry while living among his brothers, the constant reminder of their shared secret becoming unbearable. Maybe watching his father's unending sorrow became too much to bear, the sight of his pain a constant source of anguish. Maybe he needed to escape the constant presence of his crime, seeking solace in a new environment. Or maybe he simply wanted to start fresh somewhere else, to build his own life separate from the family drama, to escape the legacy of betrayal that threatened to define him. Whatever his reasons, Judah was leaving behind everything he knew, everything that had defined him. His father's household, his brothers, his heritage, his people, his familiar surroundings. He was going to live among Canaanites, foreigners who didn't worship his God or follow his family's ways. Stepping outside the boundaries of his own culture and tradition. He was stepping away from his identity as one of Jacob's sons and starting something new, forging his own path in a land that was foreign to him. The man he stayed with was named Hira, an Adullamite who would become Judah's friend, a symbol of his integration into Canaanite society. This friendship suggests that Judah wasn't just passing through. He wasn't simply seeking temporary refuge. He was actively integrating into Canaanite society, building relationships, making connections, becoming part of their world. Once Judah settled in Adullam, he did something that would have shocked his grandfather Abraham, a decision that defied the traditions and values that had been passed down through generations. Genesis 38 verse 2 records what happened next. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her. This was a significant decision, and not in a good way, a direct violation of the principles that had guided his ancestors. Judah's great-grandfather Abraham had made his servants swear not to get a wife for Isaac from the Canaanites, emphasizing the importance of marrying within their own people, maintaining their distinctiveness and their covenant with God. Abraham had said in Genesis 24 verse 3, "I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am living." Abraham wanted his son to marry within their own people, someone who shared their faith and values, someone who would uphold the traditions of their family and their relationship with God. Isaac had done the same thing with Jacob, sending him back to their relatives in Mesopotamia to find a wife rather than marrying a Canaanite woman, reinforcing the importance of maintaining their cultural and religious identity. This had been important to their family for generations, a crucial element in maintaining their distinctiveness, their covenant relationship with God, their separation from the idolatrous practices of Canaan. But Judah ignored all of that, disregarding the traditions of his ancestors. He saw a Canaanite woman, the daughter of a man named Shua, and he married her, seemingly without hesitation. The text doesn't even give us her name, dehumanizing her, reducing her to a mere object of desire. She's simply called the daughter of Shua or Batswa in Hebrew, a nameless figure in Judah's story. We don't know if Judah loved her, if he was drawn to her beauty or her charm, or if this was simply a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience designed to solidify his position within Canaanite society. We don't know if she worshipped Judah's God or clung to her Canaanite beliefs. The scripture offers no insight, breezing past these potentially pivotal details. What is undeniably clear, however, is the extent of Judah's assimilation into Canaanite society. He wasn't merely residing amongst them, but actively embedding himself, marrying into their families, and becoming inextricably linked to their culture. With each conscious choice, he drifted further from the bedrock of his father's teachings, further from the faith that had defined his family for generations. Genesis 38 verse 3 recounts, "She became pregnant and gave birth to a son, who was named Er." And then, barely skipping a beat, verse 4 informs us, "She conceived again and gave birth to a son, and named him Onan." And finally, verse 5 completes the trio. "She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him." 3 sons, Er, Onan, and Shelah. Judah now possessed his own thriving family, a household rooted in Adullam, a legacy taking root and blossoming far from the shadow of his father's tent. No longer merely one of Jacob's 12 sons, he was a father, a husband, establishing his own independent lineage separate and distinct from his brothers. But this growing separation from his heritage, this gradual detachment from his people, would soon trigger a series of unforeseen and devastating consequences that Judah, in his present contentment, couldn't possibly anticipate. His fateful decision to marry outside the shared faith and customs of his family would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately force him to confront the very core of his identity, to grapple with who he truly was and what he was willing to sacrifice. Years turned into decades, and Judah's sons matured into adulthood. When his firstborn, Er, reached a marriageable age, Judah, ever the responsible patriarch, arranged a suitable match. Genesis 38 verse 6 states, "Judah got a wife for his firstborn son Er, and her name was Tamar." This marks the introduction of Tamar into the narrative. We are granted scant details regarding her origins. Was she a Canaanite, like Judah's wife, immersed in the local customs and beliefs? Or did she hail from another group, perhaps clinging to different traditions? The text remains silent. All we know for certain is that she entered into marriage, becoming an integral part of Judah's household, burdened with all the inherent hopes and expectations associated with being the wife of the firstborn son, the future matriarch of the clan. But beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary union, something was profoundly amiss. The very next verse exposes a chilling truth. Genesis 38 verse 7 declares with brutal simplicity, "But Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death." The biblical text refrains from elaborating on the nature of Er's wickedness. It provides no details, no specifics regarding his sins or actions. What it unequivocally conveys, however, is that his transgressions were grave enough to warrant divine intervention. This wasn't an accidental death, a sudden illness, or a tragic misfortune. This was divine judgment, the hand of God reaching down to enforce his will. The Lord had examined Er's life and deemed his actions so reprehensible that they necessitated immediate and irreversible punishment. Imagine Judah's utter shock and debilitating grief. His firstborn son, the son entrusted with carrying forward his name and legacy, was abruptly and inexplicably dead. The son he had nurtured, the son for whom he had painstakingly arranged a marriage, was gone, vanished from the earth. And the rationale offered was the devastatingly simple statement that he was wicked in God's sight. This sudden and tragic death placed Tamar in an exceedingly precarious position. She was now a widow, stripped of her husband, and, critically, childless. In the societal structure of that time, a woman's security and societal standing were intrinsically tied to her husband and the sons she bore. Bereft of both, she found herself dangerously vulnerable, facing a bleak and uncertain future. She possessed no right to inherit her husband's property, no means to independently support herself. Her survival was entirely dependent on the goodwill and generosity of her father-in-law's family. But amidst this dire situation, a glimmer of hope emerged, a custom deeply ingrained in their cultural fabric known as Levirate marriage. This practice dictated that if a man died without producing an heir, his brother was obligated to marry the widow, conceiving a child who would then be legally recognized as the deceased brother's heir. This tradition served two primary purposes. It ensured the continuation of the family lineage, preventing its extinction, and it simultaneously provided vital protection and security for the vulnerable widow. Judah, fully aware of this established custom, had another son, Onan. Adhering to the dictates of their people's tradition, Judah instructed his second son, Onan, to fulfill his familial duty to his deceased brother's widow. Genesis 38 verse 8 meticulously records Judah's directive. Then Judah said to Onan, "Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother." This was Onan's explicit responsibility, his mandated role as the next brother in line. He was duty-bound to marry Tamar, to consummate that marriage, and to provide her with children who would then be legally recognized as heirs descendants, thereby ensuring that heir's name and his inheritance wouldn't simply vanish into the sands of time. It was a matter of family obligation, a solemn commitment to protecting the vulnerable widow, and a sacred duty to preserving the dead brother's legacy. Onan ostensibly agreed to this arrangement. He went through the motions, marrying Tamar and cohabitating with her as husband and wife. But Genesis 38 verse 9 exposes the dark secret harbored within Onan's heart, revealing the calculated deception he practiced in the shadows. But Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. Consider the cold calculation, the sheer selfishness inherent in Onan's actions. He fully comprehended the implications of his situation. He was acutely aware that any child born to Tamar would be legally considered heir's heir, not his own. That child would inherit a significant portion of the family inheritance as the firstborn, while Onan's own share would be correspondingly diminished. Driven by this self-serving motive, Onan concocted a devious plan. He would feign compliance with his familial duty, meticulously performing the outward rituals of marriage. He would freely indulge in the physical pleasures of having Tamar as his wife, enjoying the intimacy and companionship she offered. However, he would simultaneously and deliberately prevent her from conceiving. Every time they were together, Onan ensured that no child would be born, cunningly sabotaging the very purpose of their union. He was exploiting Tamar, using her for his own gratification while actively denying her what she was legally, morally, and culturally owed. He was outwardly pretending to fulfill his obligation while inwardly and actively undermining it. He was perpetrating a calculated lie, deceiving his father, deceiving Tamar, deceiving his entire family, all in pursuit of his own selfish and ultimately destructive interests. Genesis 38 verse 10 chronicles God's response to Onan's duplicity and blatant disregard for justice. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. God saw through Onan's carefully constructed facade of compliance. The Lord recognized the profound wickedness of exploiting Tamar while denying her the fundamental rights and protections she deserved. Onan's actions transcended mere refusal to father a child. They represented a deep-seated selfishness, a boundless greed, and the cruel exploitation of a vulnerable and defenseless woman. And just as with Er, God's judgment was swift, decisive, and irreversible. Now, Judah had lost two sons, both of whom had died in close proximity to Tamar. Both deaths were explicitly attributed to divine judgment for their respective wickedness. And Tamar remained a childless widow, still yearning for the justice and security that had been so callously promised and subsequently denied. Judah found himself in an increasingly precarious position. He had only one son remaining, Shelah, his youngest. According to established custom, Shelah should rightfully be the next in line to marry Tamar, fulfilling the Levirate obligation and providing her with the children she was owed. But Judah was gripped by fear. Two of his sons had perished after marrying this woman. What if Shelah, too, succumbed to a similar fate? Genesis 38 verse 11 reveals Judah's carefully considered decision. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar dutifully returned to her father's house, resigned to her fate. On the surface, Judah's response appeared logical, even compassionate. Shelah was still young, not yet prepared for the responsibilities of marriage. Judah instructed Tamar to remain in her father's house, patiently waiting until Shelah reached maturity, at which point they would fulfill the Levirate obligation. It seemed a fair and reasonable request. Simply grant it some time. But the text subtly exposes the true depths of Judah's thoughts. For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. Judah was consumed by a growing suspicion, a creeping fear that Tamar was somehow cursed, or that she possessed some inherent danger. He looked at the untimely deaths of and Onan and, rather than acknowledging the potential wickedness of his sons, he irrationally blamed Tamar, viewing her as the common denominator, the underlying cause of these tragic events. He perceived her as the problem, the ominous variable present in both deaths. Consequently, Judah made a promise, an outwardly reassuring commitment that he harbored no intention of fulfilling. He instructed Tamar to patiently await Shelah, but in his heart, he had already resolved that Shelah would never marry her. He was effectively banishing her, sending her away to safeguard his last remaining son, regardless of the devastating consequences for Tamar's future. Tamar, bound by custom and obligation, obeyed Judah's directive. She dutifully returned to her father's house, resigned to living there as a widow, passively awaiting the day when she would be summoned back to Judah's household to marry Shelah. She donned the traditional widow's clothing, a visible symbol of her liminal status, forever suspended between the world of the married and the world of the unmarried. She remained unmarried, clinging to the slender thread of hope that Judah would eventually keep his word, that he would honor the promise he had made to her. But time inexorably marched onward. Shelah transitioned from boyhood into manhood. He reached the age where he should have rightfully married Tamar, fulfilling his Levirate duty and securing her future. And yet, Judah remained conspicuously silent. He made no effort to summon Tamar back to his household. He initiated no arrangements for the long-awaited marriage. He simply allowed time to slip away, passively hoping that Tamar would eventually lose hope, that she would gradually give up on the promise, or perhaps even forget it entirely. Tamar found herself trapped in an agonizing limbo. She couldn't legally marry anyone else, as she was technically betrothed to Shelah, bound by Judah's unfulfilled promise. She couldn't bear children, the very cornerstone of a woman's status in that society. She was prevented from building a future, denied the basic right to determine her own destiny. Judah's broken promise had condemned her to a permanent state of uncertainty, a perpetual state of waiting. She was not truly a widow, free to remarry and forge a new life, but neither was she a wife, secure in her position within a family and community. She possessed no recognized status, no tangible security, no flicker of hope on the horizon, and Judah seemed perfectly content to leave her languishing in this desolate state. Tamar patiently waited, enduring the slow passage of time, silently watching as Shelah blossomed into full manhood, while Judah remained steadfast in his inaction, steadfast in his refusal to fulfill his long-overdue obligation. Then, a significant event occurred, a shift in circumstances that dramatically altered the existing power dynamics. Genesis 38 verse 12 recounts, "After a long time Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira the Adullamite went with him." Judah's wife had passed away, marking the end of an era. Following the customary period of mourning, Judah embarked on a journey to Timnah, drawn by the annual sheep shearing, a festive and celebratory occasion. It was akin to a harvest festival, a time when people congregated, feasted, drank, and exuberantly celebrated the fruits of their labor throughout the year. News of Judah's impending arrival reached Tamar. Genesis 38 verse 13 states, "When Tamar was told, 'Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep,' news traveled swiftly through the grapevine, and Tamar learned that Judah was preparing to leave his home and make his way toward Timnah. This seemingly insignificant piece of information ignited a spark within Tamar, prompting her to reassess her situation with newfound clarity. Shelah was now fully grown, possessing the maturity and experience to have been married for years. Yet, Judah had never summoned her back to his household. He had never taken the necessary steps to fulfill his promise. She realized, with a painful and unwavering certainty, that he never would. She had remained faithful, patient, and obedient, adhering to the prescribed social norms, and it had led her absolutely nowhere. Tamar now faced a critical juncture, a pivotal decision that would irrevocably shape the course of her life. She could passively continue waiting, indefinitely, for a promise that would never be honored, slowly fading into poverty, obscurity, and irrelevance as a forgotten widow, relegated to the fringes of society. Or, she could boldly seize control of her own destiny, taking matters into her own hands, defying societal expectations, and fighting for the justice that had been so unjustly denied. She chose action. Genesis 38 verse 14 vividly describes her carefully calculated plan. So she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that, though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to her as his wife. Tamar's plan was undeniably audacious, bordering on reckless. She removed her widow's garments, the visible symbols of her sorrow and societal constraints, and meticulously covered herself with a veil, a calculated attempt to conceal her identity and alter her appearance. She strategically positioned herself at the entrance to Enaim, a location situated along the primary route to Timnah, where Judah was certain to pass. She was deliberately disguising herself, actively attempting to create a false impression, to project an image that was fundamentally at odds with her true identity. In that particular cultural context, women who sat veiled by the roadside were often associated with shrine prostitution, women who engaged in cultic prostitution as an integral part of Canaanite religious rituals, offering their services to travelers in exchange for payment. Tamar was preparing to convincingly impersonate one of these women. She was strategically employing deception as a means to obtain from Judah himself what he had consistently denied her through his son, Shelah. It was a desperate gambit, fraught with peril. If her scheme unraveled, if her true identity was discovered, she could face severe consequences, potentially even death. But Tamar had carefully weighed the potential risks against the potential rewards, and she had resolutely concluded that the risks were, in this instance, worth taking. She had been unjustly denied justice through legitimate and socially acceptable means. Judah had flagrantly broken his promise, effectively condemning her to a life devoid of hope, security, and the fundamental right to build a future. Therefore, she would utilize the only power that remained at her disposal: the power of deception, the willingness to manipulate appearances, to claim what was rightfully hers. Judah journeyed along the road to Timnah, likely engaged in casual conversation with his friend Hira, enjoying the pleasantries of the journey. Then, his eyes fell upon a woman seated by the roadside, her face carefully concealed behind a veil. Genesis 38 verse 15 recounts, "When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face." Judah made a hasty and ultimately flawed assumption, based solely on the woman's outward appearance and her geographical location. He saw a veiled woman seated by the road and immediately concluded that she was soliciting clients, offering her services for a price. And instead of simply passing by, instead of continuing onward toward Timnah, Judah made a fateful decision. Genesis 38 verse 16 describes the unfolding events. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked, her voice carefully modulated to maintain her disguise. Judah directly propositioned her, making his intentions explicitly clear. He offered to pay for her services, and Tamar, still cloaked in her disguise, responded with the obvious question. What form of payment would he offer? She was skillfully negotiating the terms of the transaction, playing the role of a prostitute to perfection, meticulously maintaining her disguise so as not to betray her true identity. Judah responded in verse 17, "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she asked, pressing her advantage. Judah didn't have readily available payment with him at that moment, so he promised to send a young goat at a later time. This represented a significant payment, indicative of Judah's willingness to compensate generously for the encounter. But Tamar wasn't satisfied with a mere promise, a verbal commitment that could easily be broken. She sought a tangible form of security, a guarantee that the promised payment would indeed materialize. She asked for a pledge, a form of collateral that he would leave with her until the goat arrived. Judah asked the natural question in verse 18. He said, "What pledge should I give you? Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand." She answered, her voice unwavering despite the inherent risk. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. Consider the significance of Tamar's carefully chosen request. She didn't ask for something trivial, something easily replaceable, or something of little personal value. She boldly requested his seal and its cord, along with the staff he carried in his hand. In their cultural context, these three items held immense significance, functioning as personal identifiers akin to a signature or a modern-day identification card. The seal was meticulously used to mark documents and property, visibly denoting ownership and authenticity, unequivocally establishing that the item in question belonged to Judah. It was typically engraved with his unique and distinctive mark, ensuring that it couldn't be easily replicated or forged. The cord served to hold the seal, allowing it to be worn around the neck for convenient access and display. The staff was a walking stick, often intricately carved or decorated in a distinctive manner, further reflecting the owner's personal identity and status. These three items, collectively, served as an unmistakable representation of Judah's identity. Anyone who encountered them would immediately recognize them as belonging to him, establishing his presence and authority. They were his identity, his signature, his personal mark. And he willingly handed them over to this veiled woman, trusting her word that she would return them upon receipt of the promised goat. Judah then proceeded to sleep with her, completely oblivious to the fact that he was lying with his own daughter-in-law. He had no inkling that this veiled woman was, in reality, Tamar, the widow he had promised to his son Shelah years prior, a promise that he had callously disregarded and actively broken. He genuinely believed that he was engaging in a simple, transactional encounter with a roadside prostitute. Genesis 38 verse 19 recounts the immediate aftermath of their encounter. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Tamar returned home, meticulously removed her disguise, shedding the carefully constructed persona of a prostitute. She then donned her widow's clothing once more, resuming her former identity and outwardly projecting her established societal status. But beneath the surface, she carried within her Judah's seal, cord, and staff, tangible proof of their encounter, powerful symbols of his broken promise and her determination to secure justice. And, crucially, she was pregnant with his child, the ultimate realization of her carefully orchestrated plan. Her audacious scheme had succeeded. She had obtained from Judah himself what he had consistently denied her through his son, Shelah, seizing control of her own destiny and forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions. Judah, to his credit, kept his word regarding the promised payment. Genesis 38 verse 20 states, "Meanwhile Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite, in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. Judah dispatched Hira back to Enaim with the young goat, instructing him to pay the woman and retrieve his seal, cord, and staff. But when Hira arrived at the designated location, the woman was nowhere to be found." Verse 21 continues. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enaim?" "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here," they said. Hira diligently searched for the woman, making inquiries throughout the town. But the local men uniformly insisted that there was no shrine prostitute operating in that area. They had no idea who he was referring to. Hira returned to Judah empty-handed, dejected and bewildered, and reported what he had learned in verse 22. So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said, 'There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here.'" Judah now faced a significant predicament. His personal items, his seal, cord, and staff, the very emblems of his identity and authority, were irretrievably lost, presumably in the possession of a woman he couldn't locate. But he ultimately made a pragmatic decision, prioritizing his own reputation over the recovery of his lost belongings. In verse 23, Judah declared, Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." Judah decided to cut his losses, attempting to minimize the potential damage to his reputation. He didn't want word to spread that he had patronized a roadside prostitute and then been unable to reclaim his personal belongings. It would be embarrassing, humiliating, potentially tarnishing his standing within the community. Better to simply let it go, to silently absorb the loss, and to move on with his life, hoping that the incident would fade from memory. He had attempted to fulfill his obligation by sending the goat. That, in his mind, was sufficient. So Judah consciously chose to forget about the encounter and continued on with his life, blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing on the horizon. 3 months elapsed. Then, news reached Judah that would irrevocably turn his world upside down, shattering his carefully constructed facade of respectability and forcing him to confront the harsh reality of his actions. Genesis 38 verse 24 records the pivotal moment. About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Someone had discovered that Tamar was pregnant. She was still residing as a widow in her father's house, still technically betrothed to Shelah, and now she was visibly carrying someone's child. In their cultural context, this was an extremely serious offense, a blatant violation of societal norms and religious laws. She was betrothed to Shelah, meaning that being pregnant by another man was considered adultery, a transgression punishable by death. Judah's response was immediate and unequivocally harsh. He didn't pause to ask questions. He didn't initiate an investigation to ascertain the facts. He simply pronounced judgment, fueled by a potent combination of outrage and self-righteousness. "Bring her out and have her burned to death," he decreed. This was the prescribed penalty for such a grievous breach of societal and religious codes, a punishment designed to deter others from committing similar transgressions. Judah, the same man who had broken his own promise to Tamar, the same man who had left her trapped in a state of perpetual widowhood for years, the same man who had recently slept with a woman he believed to be a prostitute, this same Judah displayed absolutely no mercy for Tamar. He was prepared to summarily execute her for the very type of behavior he had just engaged in himself, demonstrating a staggering degree of hypocrisy. Judah could casually sleep with a prostitute, dismissing it as a momentary lapse in judgment, a harmless indulgence. But Tamar's pregnancy, born out of his own actions and broken promises, deserved the ultimate penalty, death. Judah had demonstrably failed in his obligations to her, condemning her to a life of uncertainty and hardship. But she was the one who should pay the ultimate price, sacrificing her life to atone for a crime that he had directly enabled. But then, a dramatic turn of events occurred, a carefully orchestrated maneuver that would forever alter the course of the narrative. Genesis 38 verse 25 describes the pivotal moment. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said. And she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Tamar was being led toward her execution, facing the imminent prospect of a fiery death. But she had meticulously planned for this very moment, anticipating the potential consequences of her actions and preparing a powerful defense. She retrieved Judah's seal, cord, and staff, and dispatched them to him with a carefully crafted message. She refrained from publicly shaming him, choosing instead to maintain a semblance of decorum. She didn't explicitly announce the identity of the child's father, nor did she attempt to publicly humiliate Judah. She simply presented the evidence, the undeniable proof of their encounter, and subtly asked him to recognize the items and acknowledge his ownership of them. She was offering Judah a choice, a crucial decision that would determine both her fate and his own. He could remain silent, allowing her to die, thereby protecting his reputation and preserving his standing within the community. Or he could embrace the truth, publicly admitting to his actions and accepting the consequences of his deception and broken promises. The decision was entirely his. Judah gazed upon those familiar items, his seal, his cord, his staff, the very emblems of his identity. The personal identifiers that he had carelessly handed over to a veiled woman by the roadside just 3 months prior. And in that profound moment, Judah saw himself with startling clarity, stripping away the layers of self-deception and rationalization that had clouded his judgment for so long. He saw his hypocrisy, his blatant disregard for justice, and his unwavering commitment to self-preservation, even at the expense of others. He saw how he had repeatedly broken his promises to Tamar, condemning her to a life of hardship and uncertainty, and how she had been forced to take matters into her own hands, resorting to deception as a means of securing the justice he had so callously denied. Genesis 38 verse 26 records his response, a public confession that marked a turning point in his life. Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." And he did not sleep with her again. Judah did something that must have reverberated throughout the gathered crowd, shocking everyone present with its unexpected candor. He publicly confessed his role in the unfolding drama. He admitted that the items were indeed his, acknowledging his ownership of them. He openly acknowledged that he was the father of Tamar's child, accepting responsibility for his actions and their far-reaching consequences. And then, he uttered words that were even more shocking, more revolutionary in their implications. He declared that Tamar was more righteous than he was, openly acknowledging her moral superiority and implicitly condemning his own flawed judgment and actions. Judah took full responsibility for his failures. He admitted his egregious failure to give Shelah to Tamar as he had solemnly promised, confessing his dereliction of duty and his disregard for Tamar's well-being. He recognized that Tamar's carefully orchestrated deception was a direct result of his broken promise and his subsequent neglect, a desperate attempt to secure the justice he had so unjustly denied. He saw that she had been fighting for what was rightfully hers, battling against the societal forces that had conspired to strip her of her agency and her future. And instead of resorting to excuses, instead of attempting to minimize his guilt or deflect blame onto others, he simply told the truth, facing the consequences of his actions with newfound courage and humility. This was a pivotal turning point for Judah, a moment of profound self-reflection and moral reckoning. The man who had callously participated in the sale of his own brother, the man who had willingly deceived his father for personal gain, the man who had broken his promise to his daughter-in-law, condemning her to a life of uncertainty, and the man who had been prepared to execute her for getting pregnant, finally confronted his own sin, openly acknowledging his failings and publicly confessing his transgressions. When Judah looked at his seal, cord, and staff, the very items he had carelessly given to a veiled woman 3 months earlier, everything became crystal clear. He was holding the tangible proof of his own guilt in his hands, unable to deny the truth that stared back at him. The woman he had summarily ordered to be burned to death was pregnant with his child, not the child of some unknown adulterer, and she was the same daughter-in-law he had abandoned for years, leaving her to languish in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Judah stood at a crossroads, facing a critical decision that would define his character and shape his legacy. He could remain silent, allowing Tamar to die, thereby protecting his reputation. No one would ever know the truth, not if he simply remained silent. Or he could choose a path utterly foreign to him. He could embrace honesty, confessing the full truth, regardless of the devastating consequences to himself. Genesis 38 verse 26 immortalizes Judah's choice. Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." And the scripture adds, "He did not sleep with her again." These words were revolutionary, a seismic shift in Judah's character. He didn't offer excuses, didn't attempt to twist the narrative in his favor, and didn't deflect blame onto Tamar for her deception or defend his actions by emphasizing her trickery. Instead, before the entire community, he issued a public declaration that reverberated with shock. "She is more righteous than I." Consider the enormity of Judah's admission, "Daddy." He was confessing, before the watchful eyes of his entire community, that he had engaged in sexual relations with a woman he believed to be a prostitute. He was acknowledging his failure to fulfill his promise to give Shelah to Tamar, leaving her vulnerable and desperate. He was accepting full responsibility for creating the very circumstances that led Tamar to feel compelled to deceive him. Moreover, he was conceding that a woman, a person with virtually no power or standing within their rigid societal structure, had acted with greater integrity and justice than he had. This was a stark contrast to the Judah who had coldly proposed selling Joseph into slavery, his mind consumed solely with profit and self-interest. That Judah had coldly calculated, "What will we gain?" and remained unmoved by his father's agonizing grief over the fabricated lie. That Judah had broken his solemn promise to Tamar without a second thought. But this Judah was different. This Judah was embracing accountability. He was choosing to speak the truth, even when it wounded his pride. He was prioritizing integrity over self-preservation. While his confession couldn't erase his past failures, it signaled a profound internal transformation. The scripture adds one crucial detail. He did not sleep with her again. Judah recognized that Tamar was, above all, his daughter-in-law, and their encounter had been a singular event born of deception and desperation. He didn't attempt to pursue a continued relationship with her or treat her as a wife. Instead, he respected the boundaries of what had occurred and provided for her needs as family, as someone now under his protection and responsibility. Judah's public confession saved Tamar's life, a testament to the power of honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to confront one's own sin. This was the genesis of his evolution from a man who habitually ran from responsibility to a man who faced it head-on. Tamar's pregnancy progressed, and when the time for her delivery arrived, a remarkable event unfolded. Genesis 38 verse 27 reveals, "When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb." Twins. Tamar wasn't carrying just one child but two, signifying that Judah's lineage would not only continue but would now flourish through two sons. The family legacy, which had seemed precarious after the deaths of Er and Onan, was now secured with the promise of future generations. However, the birth itself was extraordinary. Genesis 38 verse 28 and 29 vividly describe the events. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, "So this is how you have broken out." And he was named Perez. The midwife, keenly aware of the significance of birth order, watched attentively to discern which twin would emerge first, as the firstborn son was traditionally granted special status and inheritance rights. When one baby's hand emerged, she swiftly tied a scarlet thread around his wrist, marking him as the presumed firstborn. Just as quickly, the situation changed. The baby retracted his hand back into the womb, and his brother unexpectedly emerged first. Stunned by this unpredictable twist, the midwife exclaimed about how this child had broken out ahead of his brother. And thus, he was named Perez, meaning breaking out or breach. Genesis 38 verse 30 completes the narrative. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. The second twin, the one who had initially extended his hand, was finally born and named Zerah, meaning scarlet or brightness, likely referring to the scarlet thread tied around his wrist. This birth story held profound significance beyond its unusual circumstances. Perez, the twin who had broken through and emerged first despite his brother's initial advance, became the ancestor through whom Judah's most significant descendants would come. The lineage of King David would trace back to Perez, and ultimately Jesus Christ himself would be descended from Perez. Tamar, the Canaanite woman who had been wronged and abandoned, who had to resort to deception to claim her rights, became one of the few women explicitly mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus, a testament to God's surprising grace. Her twins not only secured Judah's legacy, but became integral parts of the unfolding story of redemption that would span the centuries to come. Years flowed by after the birth of Tamar's twins. Judah continued with his life, raising his sons and managing his household. Meanwhile, back in his father Jacob's encampment, the dynamics among the family were undergoing a shift. The 12 brothers were growing older, and the need for established leadership became increasingly apparent. By birth order, Reuben should have been the natural leader. As the firstborn, he should have been entitled to the double portion of the inheritance and the accompanying authority. However, Reuben had disqualified himself through his own actions. Genesis 35 verse 22 records that Reuben had slept with Bilhah, his father's concubine, a grave offense that cost him his position of privilege. Next in line were Simeon and Levi, but they too had proven themselves unfit for leadership. In Genesis 34, they had orchestrated a deceptive and brutal massacre of all the men of Shechem in retaliation for the violation of their sister Dinah. Their violent and deceitful actions had endangered the entire family and demonstrated that they were motivated by uncontrollable rage rather than sound judgment. This meant that Judah, the fourth son, was next in line. Unlike his older brothers, Judah had displayed evidence of growth and transformation. His public confession concerning Tamar revealed a capacity for honesty and accountability. His willingness to acknowledge his mistakes set him apart from his brothers, who tended to either act impulsively or fail to fulfill their obligations. The Bible doesn't pinpoint a precise moment when Judah formally ascended to the position of leader among his brothers. Rather, we see it emerging organically through the unfolding events. Judah's brothers began to seek his guidance in decision-making. When challenging situations arose, they turned to Judah for counsel. His voice now commanded a weight and respect that the older brothers' voices had lost. Judah was evolving into someone his brothers could trust and depend upon. The man who had once been driven by self-interest and the pursuit of profit was gradually becoming someone who prioritized the well-being of his family, his duty, and doing what was right, even when it required sacrifice. His transformation wasn't an instantaneous or dramatic event. It was a gradual process, shaped by choices made over the course of years and lessons learned through hardship. This leadership would face its ultimate test when a devastating famine struck the land, forcing them into a situation that none of them could have foreseen. A severe famine gripped the entire region. Crops withered and died. Livestock perished. Food became a scarce and precious commodity. Jacob's family, along with everyone else, faced the looming threat of starvation. Genesis 42 verse 1 captures Jacob's sense of urgency. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" Jacob had heard reports that Egypt possessed grain available for purchase. Through some means, Egypt had anticipated the famine and had diligently stored up food reserves. Jacob couldn't fathom why his sons were idly standing by when they had the opportunity to secure food and save their family from starvation. Verse 2 continues, he continued, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." This wasn't a suggestion. It was a matter of survival. The family urgently needed food, and Egypt seemed to be their only viable option. So, 10 of Joseph's brothers prepared to undertake the journey. Genesis 42 verse 3 tells us, "Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt." Notice that it specifically mentions 10 brothers, not all 12. Verse 4 clarifies the reason. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. Benjamin was Joseph's full brother, both sons of Rachel. After the agonizing loss of Joseph, Jacob was consumed by a fear of losing Benjamin as well. He kept his youngest son close to home, where he felt he could protect him from harm. The 10 brothers traveled to Egypt and eventually found themselves standing before the man in charge of selling grain. Unbeknownst to them, they were standing before Joseph himself, the brother they had sold into slavery more than 20 years earlier. Joseph recognized them instantly, but they failed to recognize him. Joseph decided to test his brothers to determine if they had undergone any genuine change. He accused them of being spies and imprisoned them for 3 days. Then, he presented them with a condition to prove their innocence. They needed to bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, to Egypt. Genesis 42 verse 19 records Joseph's demand. "If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households." Verse 20 continues, "But you must bring your youngest brother to me so that your words may be verified and that you may not die." Joseph kept Simeon as a hostage and sent the remaining brothers home with grain and instructions to return with Benjamin. The brothers were filled with dread. They couldn't shake the memory of what they had done to Joseph. Genesis 42 verse 21 reveals their deep-seated guilt. They said to one another, Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us." Even after more than 2 decades, they still vividly remembered Joseph's cries for mercy. They still carried the burden of their guilt. Now, they believed they were finally being punished for their past actions. The brothers returned home to Canaan with grain, but also burdened with an impossible dilemma. They had to bring Benjamin to Egypt, or Simeon would face certain death, and they would be unable to purchase any more grain. Jacob's response in verse 36 was one of absolute refusal. Their father Jacob said to them, "You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." Jacob adamantly refused to send Benjamin. Reuben attempted to persuade him by offering his own 2 sons as collateral in verse 37, but Jacob remained unyielding. The grain they had brought would eventually run out, leaving them to confront an agonizing choice: starve or send Benjamin to Egypt. Time passed, and the grain the brothers had brought from Egypt began to dwindle. The family once again faced the grim prospect of starvation. They were left with no alternative but to return to Egypt for more food. But they couldn't go without Benjamin, and Jacob still refused to grant his permission. Genesis 43 verse 1 and 2 set the stage. Now the famine was still severe in the land. So when they had eaten all the grain they had brought back from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go back and buy us a little more food." But Judah reminded his father of the Egyptian ruler's stern warning. Verse 3, "But Judah said to him, the man warned us solemnly, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you.'" Single quote. There was no way around it. No Benjamin meant no grain, which meant death for the entire family. Jacob remained resistant. He couldn't understand why they had even mentioned Benjamin to the Egyptian official. But the brothers explained that they had been left with no choice. The man had questioned them directly about their family. Everything had seemed innocuous at the time. Then Judah did something that revealed the profound extent of his transformation. He stepped forward with a proposal that was entirely different from anything Reuben had offered. Genesis 43 verse 8 and 9 record Judah's words. "Then Judah said to Israel his father, 'Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life.'" Carefully consider what Judah was offering. Reuben had offered his 2 sons as collateral, essentially suggesting that his children would pay the price for his failure. But Judah offered himself. He declared, "I myself will guarantee his safety." He stated, "You can hold me personally responsible." He promised that if Benjamin didn't return, Judah would accept complete and permanent disgrace before his father for the remainder of his life. This wasn't merely a promise. It was Judah placing his entire relationship with his father on the line. He was asserting that if Benjamin didn't come back, Judah would forfeit his father's respect, his standing within the family, and his honor. Everything would be lost. Judah added in verse 10, "As it is, if we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice already." He was being practical and emphasizing the urgency of the situation. Every day they delayed was a day closer to starvation. They needed to act decisively and promptly. Jacob finally yielded to Judah's compelling proposal. The guarantee Judah offered, his personal responsibility, his willingness to bear the consequences himself, was sufficient to convince Jacob to allow Benjamin to go. Genesis 43 verses 11 to 14 describe Jacob's instructions. He instructed them to take gifts, to take double the silver. And then he added in verse 14, "And may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." Jacob was entrusting Benjamin to Judah's care. He was placing his most precious remaining son into the hands of the brother who had once proposed selling Joseph into slavery. But Judah was no longer that man. The guarantee he offered demonstrated that he had learned the true meaning of responsibility. The brothers returned to Egypt with Benjamin, and Joseph received them in his house. He caught sight of Benjamin and was so overwhelmed with emotion that he had to excuse himself to weep privately. After regaining his composure, Joseph had a meal prepared for them. Everything appeared to be progressing smoothly. They ate together, though the Egyptians dined separately. Joseph even gave Benjamin 5 times as much food as the others. However, Joseph had one final test prepared for his brothers. Genesis 44 verse 1 and 2 describe the instructions he gave to his steward. Now Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house. Fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain. Joseph's silver cup was secretly planted in Benjamin's sack. The brothers departed from Egypt early the next morning, feeling happy and relieved. They had Benjamin with them, they had secured grain, and they were on their way home. But they hadn't traveled far when Joseph's steward overtook them. The steward accused them of stealing Joseph's silver cup. The brothers were shocked and vehemently protested their innocence. So certain were they of their honesty that they made a rash promise in verse 9. If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my lord's slaves. But the steward countered with different terms in verse 10. Very well then, let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave. The rest of you will be free from blame. Each brother quickly lowered his sack, and the steward systematically searched them one by one, starting with the oldest and ending with the youngest. Genesis 44 verse 12 recounts the devastating moment. Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. The brothers were utterly devastated. Verse 13 tells us, at this they tore their clothes. Then they all loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. They could have abandoned Benjamin and saved themselves. The steward had explicitly stated that only the one found with the cup would be enslaved, but they all returned to the city together. None of them was willing to abandon Benjamin. When they arrived at Joseph's house, they threw themselves on the ground before him. Joseph addressed them in verse 15. What is this you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find things out by divination? He was carefully maintaining his disguise as a powerful Egyptian official who possessed mystical abilities. Judah answered on behalf of all of them in verse 16. What can we say to my Lord? What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my Lord's slaves, we ourselves and the one who was found to have the cup. But Joseph responded with the same terms as his steward. Verse 17. Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back to your father in peace. This was the moment of truth. Joseph was offering his brothers an easy way out. They could return home, inform their father that Benjamin had stolen something and was being held as a slave, and move on with their lives. It was eerily reminiscent of the situation with Joseph many years prior. They had the opportunity to abandon a brother and protect themselves. But Judah couldn't do it. He couldn't bring himself to abandon Benjamin. He couldn't break his solemn promise to his father. He couldn't return home without Rachel's son. Every fiber of his being rebelled against the very notion. So Judah stepped forward. What followed was one of the most moving and powerful speeches in all of Scripture. Judah approached Joseph and requested permission to speak. Genesis 44 verse 18 begins. Then Judah went up to him and said, Pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself. Judah was about to pour out his heart to this imposing Egyptian ruler, completely unaware that he was actually speaking to Joseph, his long-lost brother. He recounted the entire story, reminding Joseph of how he had inquired about their family. Verses 19 to 23 recount the dialogue. My lord asked his servants, Do you have a father or a brother? And we answered, We have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, Bring him down to me so I can see him for myself." And we said to my Lord, "The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, his father will die. But you told your servants, 'Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again.'" Judah continued, explaining what happened when they returned home, as described in verses 24 to 29. "When we went back to your servant my father, we told him what my Lord had said. Then our father said, 'Go back and buy a little more food.' But we said, 'We cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us will we go. We cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us.' Your servant my father said to us, 'You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me, and I said, "He has surely been torn to pieces," and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery." Then Judah described his father's current state in verses 30 and 31. "So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow." Consider what Judah was doing. He was making Joseph fully aware of the devastating impact that losing Benjamin would have on Jacob. He was meticulously painting a picture for Joseph, a vivid depiction of the despair that would engulf Jacob upon Benjamin's absence. He was reminding Joseph that Jacob had already suffered the unimaginable loss of Rachel's one son. Benjamin, he emphasized, was all that remained of Rachel's legacy, all that Jacob had left to cherish. Jacob's very existence, his will to live, was inextricably intertwined with Benjamin's safety and well-being. Judah, in his profound empathy, was endeavoring to make Joseph see through their father's eyes, feel the depth of his paternal love, his crippling pain, and his desperate affection for his youngest son, Benjamin. It was a plea born of understanding and a dawning sense of responsibility. Then Judah arrived at the pivotal point, the turning of the tide that would forever alter their destinies. Genesis 44 verses 32 to 34 immortalizes his heartfelt, desperate plea. "Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, 'If I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father." Judah, in an act of unprecedented selflessness, was offering to take Benjamin's place as a slave, willingly sacrificing his own freedom. He was prepared to relinquish his family ties, forsake his future prospects, surrender everything he held dear, all so that Benjamin could return home to their father and ease Jacob's anguish. He would rather endure a lifetime of servitude in the alien land of Egypt than witness his father's heart break yet again, shattered beyond repair. This was a stark and dramatic transformation, a complete reversal of the man Judah had once been. The old Judah, driven by greed and self-preservation, had callously sold Joseph into slavery, seeking to avoid responsibility and reap a financial reward. He had coldly calculated, "What will we gain?" thinking only of his own personal advantage. But this new Judah, transformed by remorse and empathy, was now willing to lose everything, to sacrifice his own life, to protect his brother and spare his father unimaginable pain. He was offering himself as a substitute, willingly accepting the punishment that Benjamin faced, sacrificing his own future for the sake of another. Judah's plea was a testament to his newfound understanding of his father's grief, an understanding that had eluded him for so long. He now grasped the depth of the wound that Joseph's loss had inflicted upon Jacob. He had witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of that grief, the slow and agonizing destruction it had wrought upon his father's spirit over the past 2 decades. And now, with unwavering conviction, he was declaring that he would not allow that tragedy to repeat itself. He was prepared to do anything, to pay any price, to prevent his father from enduring that excruciating pain once more. Judah's impassioned speech shattered Joseph's carefully constructed facade. He could no longer maintain his disguise, the charade he had so meticulously crafted. Overcome by emotion, he ordered all the Egyptians to leave the room, and in a voice thick with emotion, he revealed his true identity to his astonished brothers. The reunion was a scene of overwhelming emotion, a torrent of tears and embraces. Joseph, his heart filled with forgiveness, reassured his brothers, explaining how God had orchestrated even their evil actions for good, using them to save countless lives during the famine. The family was finally reunited, their fractured bonds mended by forgiveness and love. Jacob, accompanied by his entire household, journeyed to Egypt and was reunited with Joseph, the son he had long mourned as dead. They settled in the fertile region of Goshen, where they prospered and grew, their numbers increasing exponentially. Years flowed by, and Jacob, now an old man, felt the approach of his own mortality. Sensing his time was near, he summoned his sons to his side, not just to bid them farewell, but to impart a prophetic blessing, to foretell the destiny of their descendants under the divine inspiration of God. This was not merely a father's parting words. It was a profound prophecy, a glimpse into the future of each tribe, spoken under the direct guidance of the Almighty. When Jacob reached Judah, he uttered words that would reverberate throughout history, echoing through the ages. Genesis 49 verses 8 to 12 enshrines Jacob's blessing upon Judah for eternity. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion he crouches and lies down like a lioness. Who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come and the obedience of the nations shall be his. He will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch. He will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes will be darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. Consider the depth and power of Jacob's prophecy. He declared that Judah's brothers would praise him, a fitting tribute considering that the very name Judah meant praise. He foretold that Judah would be like a lion, a symbol of power, courage, and unwavering respect. But most significantly, he proclaimed, "The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet." A scepter, the emblem of kingship, was the symbol of power and authority. Jacob was prophesying that kings would arise from Judah's lineage, that the leadership Judah had demonstrated among his brothers would become a permanent, royal attribute of his descendants. The tribe of Judah would be destined to produce the future rulers of Israel. This prophecy found its fulfillment generations later when David, a shepherd boy from the tribe of Judah, ascended to the throne and became king of Israel, ushering in an era of unprecedented prosperity and power. 2 Samuel, chapter 7, immortalizes God's unwavering promise to David, assuring him that his throne would be established forever, that his descendants would rule perpetually. Every subsequent king of Judah, without exception, descended from this very lineage. However, Jacob's prophecy extended even further, reaching far beyond the earthly realm. He declared that the scepter would remain with Judah until he to whom it belongs shall come and the obedience of the nations shall be his. This was a clear allusion to a future ruler, a Messiah, who would not only reign over Israel, but would also command the allegiance of all nations, uniting the world under his righteous rule. This was, without a doubt, a messianic prophecy, pointing forward to the ultimate King, Jesus Christ, the Savior of mankind. Matthew chapter 1 begins with these momentous words in verse 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. The genealogy that follows meticulously traces Jesus' lineage, weaving its way back through David, through the kings of Judah, through Perez, Judah's son, through Tamar, ultimately leading back to Judah himself, the flawed but ultimately redeemed ancestor. Revelation 5 verse 5 refers to Jesus as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, solidifying the connection between the Old Testament prophecy and its New Testament fulfillment. The image of Judah as a lion, so vividly portrayed in Jacob's blessing, became one of the most revered titles of the Messiah. Jesus is hailed as the Lion of Judah, the ultimate realization of everything Jacob had prophesied about his son. Reflect upon the remarkable journey that Judah undertook. He began as a man who, driven by greed, sold his own brother into slavery, forever burdened by the guilt of breaking his father's heart. He made grievous errors with Tamar, breaking promises and acting unjustly. But through his failures, through Tamar's courageous confrontation, through the long years of carrying the weight of his guilt, Judah underwent a profound transformation. He learned to embrace responsibility, to confront his past mistakes and make amends. He learned to speak the truth, even when it came at a great personal cost. He learned to prioritize the needs of others above his own selfish desires. He learned the true meaning of love and sacrifice. And when the moment arrived to prove the depth of his transformation, Judah offered himself as a slave, willingly sacrificing his own freedom to save his brother and shield his father from further grief. From this broken, flawed man emerged the royal line of Israel, a testament to God's redemptive power. Music from his union with Tamar, which began in deception but ended in justice, came Perez, through whom King David would descend. And ultimately, from this messy, complicated music family story emerged Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. Judah's story serves as a powerful reminder that God doesn't limit himself to using perfect people. He uses those who stumble, who make terrible choices, who carry the burden of deep guilt, but who are willing to learn, to grow, and to change. He takes our worst moments and weaves them into his grand plan of redemption. The Lion of Judah didn't begin as a lion. He started as a coward and a failure, but through God's grace and his own willingness to change, he became the Father of Kings and the ancestor of the King of Kings. If the story impacted you today, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more biblical stories like this one. These ancient accounts aren't just history. They're filled with lessons for our lives today. And if you know someone who needs to hear that God can redeem even our biggest failures, share this video with them. Let's spread these powerful truths together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll dive into another fascinating character from Scripture. God bless you.